Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another Limbus Company video. Today we got a bit of a shorter video today. Well, I say shorter, but it's still like over 10 minutes long. And basically, I've been experimenting a little bit with the new ego gifts that just released. And for this video in particular, I was using the index's ego gifts, the ones that specifically buff the index. And those include Someone's Device and Providence of the Prescript. Both of them don't really do too much, if I'm being completely honest. Someone's Device is obviously better because the Providence of the Prescript, all it does is if you inflict sinking, you gain poise. And if you've gained poise multiple times through this ego gift, then you deal more damage when critting. So it's like it's a decent damage buff, you know. Providence of the Prescript. It's a fine ego gift, but it's not very interesting, to be honest. In fact, the best thing it has going for it is the fact that it's a poise ego gift that does something more than just helping you generate poise. It obviously does do that, but it also gives you an even further damage buff at some point, which is good. But the real most interesting ego gift of all of them here is Someone's Device, which basically makes it so that every time you kill a Prescript's target, so it effectively needs an index identity in the team to actually work at all. But when you kill the Prescript's target, it gives a gloom power up and inflicts a bit of sinking count. And if you're an index identity, you get even more. But it needs an index identity on the field in the first place, because I don't think this ego gift is capable of inflicting the Prescript's target by itself. It might be, but I've never used it without an index identity, so I wouldn't know. But even more important than that is the second effect that this ego gift has. And I say that because it's for this run in particular, I was trying to beat the mirror dungeon using only these two ego gifts while also soloing it with, you know, index e-song. And this ego gift was the most impactful thing in the entire thing, because its secondary effect is the fact that it forces the index characters to take a percentage of their health damage every single turn, depending on how much karmic consequences they have. For most fights, most regular fights, I should say, it's not that important because it's kind of difficult to actually gain karmic consequences. Like, the only way to actually do it is to use your defense skill, basically. At least for both Yi-Song and Don Quixote. Because that automatically sends them into a unlock state, a higher unlock state, and then they gain karmic consequences depending on how much time they skipped, basically. And for Yi-Song, if he's doing this, he gains about 35 karmic consequences if he does it on turn 1. Which basically means that if you have to use his evade on turn 1, which, when you're soloing, most boss fights, you kind of have to, unless they're like, you know, the one we're watching currently right now. So pretty much all the time, he gets 35 karma consequences on turn 1, and that means every single turn he's taking 35% of his total HP every single turn. Fortunately, it doesn't this effect can never kill him because it never drops his health below 20%. But it is enough to make most regular boss fights somewhat difficult, because he's pretty much always permanently at low health if he has to use his evade skill early. The only benefit from this, though, there is a benefit, and that's the fact that the index get a skill power depending on how much damage they take from this effect. And that is pretty powerful, because it effectively buffs all of their skills, including their evade, so it is a very strong effect, but you're permanently stuck at low health. So, where does that leave us for this run? Because obviously I was trying to solo it with only this identity, and I'm only going to show like 2 fights, I think, because they were particularly difficult. The first, obviously, is the Church of Years, which is pretty hard, considering the fact that since we're only using those 2 ego gifts, that means that there is no ego resource generating gifts, and because of that, we can't spam egos, like, at all. And that's very bad in this fight in particular, because you are always at a skill deficit no matter what. Fortunately, Isong does have Furiosa, which helps to mitigate it a little bit, but it kind of makes the start of the fight a little bit of a struggle, especially considering the fact that Isong is fatal to pierce damage, which is the primary damage type in this fight. So yeah, he's taking fatal damage all the time in the first couple of turns, but because he has an anti-stagger effect, and with a little bit of luck, it can get through it moderately fine. Furiosa definitely helps out a lot, though, considering the fact that it can work sort of as a bit of an ego to attack multiple enemies. But it takes like 5 turns to set it up, and yeah, you only use it like 2 or 3 times, so. The real struggle is just being able to survive. You kind of have to get lucky to do that, because he's fatal to a lot of damage in that fight.
동료들이 침침해 보여. 그대는 어디까지 가고 있을지 도착하지 않겠소만. 여기 심장이 여기 심장이 여기 심장이.
자, 악당 퇴치 성공! 오늘도 정말 멋진 활약이었어.
And the second fight is the Night of Despair. Personally, I think this is the best fight in the entire game. It is just so well designed. I mean, unlike most other fights, this one kind of forces you to play into her gimmick, because the Night of Despair, once you do stagger her, she gains a ton of shield every turn and 10 protection, which means you're just not doing any damage to her until you start destroying her swords. And that is pretty much the reason why this is my favorite fight in the game, and why I think it's the best fight in the game, because you can't really brute force it. I mean, obviously you can if you focus on status effects specifically, but you can't brute force it with pure damage, basically. You kind of have to use status effects if you want to do that. And this fight is one of the fights where you kind of have to use the evade on turn 1. Obviously, we failed to use it very effectively there because, yeah, missed it on the 3rd roll, but it is what it is. And because of that, we are now permanently at 20% health for the entirety of this fight. We cannot go higher than 20% health, even if we had like a ton of ego gifts, because every single turn at the end of the turn, yeah, someone's device would trigger and just cut us back down immediately. It makes it very scary, actually, because since you're so low on health and you can't take any damage, and there is just a lot of fatal damage in this fight in particular, because the Night of Despair does do primarily pierce damage, it makes it so that you kind of have to really, really rely on the evade. And because of that, you're always terrified that you're just going to randomly hit the 5% and fail your attack. Or like right here, they just outroll our attack and they nearly kill the queen. How tragic. I'd never let that happen. It's actually quite rare for her to be at that low health, to be honest, because effectively the only way for her to actually reach that low health is if she takes that much damage before she starts, you know, chanting her Arcana Slave attack. And the reason why is because when she is chanting, if her shield ever breaks, then she just cancels the skill and retreats. So it means that she has to take all of that damage early in the fight, which is not something that happens very often, I'll say that much. Mostly because, like, she just outspeeds and you usually have enough damage to stagger the knight early, and then nothing really clashes against her, so like everything ignores the queen up until the point where she starts chanting. I think it's like the second or third turn after she starts it. I don't remember exactly, but there is a point where they start targeting down her to try and break her shield and get her to retreat before she can use the Arcana Slave. But anyways, this fight is pretty difficult because, yeah, we're both really low on health, which is incredibly rare to happen. It really is just a little bit of bad luck, though, so what can you really say about that? And Furiosa is not a particularly useful attack in this fight, considering the fact that, you know, each of the swords are only fatal to one specific damage type, and that's honestly one of the big reasons why Isong here is not a particularly good identity in this fight. Because in order to beat the Knight of Despair, you want to have one specific damage type that you focus on, and Isong cannot do that. So it just, every one of the swords is a gamble as to whether or not you can actually break them in time. And Furiosa makes it even worse because it has 9 attack weight, so it's always targeting multiple swords. And since it's unfocused volley, each coin hits individually, so it's like, it's so much RNG. You can't rely on that thing at all to break the swords. Unless it's the last sword, of course, but at that point, any skill can break it, so it doesn't matter. I think I missed like 4 evades in this fight, which is crazy to think about. It's pretty obvious that that's going to happen at some point because, yeah, it's only a 5% chance that you fail. And when you have to roll it like 100 times in a row, that's going to happen.
자, 악당 배치 성공! 오늘도 정말 멋진 활약이었어. 가족끼리는 서로 돕는 거랬어요.
So, I wasn't actually planning on showing this fight because, well, simply put, I didn't win. Spoilers. And this is the reason why I specifically didn't say that this is a solo video, because yeah, I did not actually solo this floor. Not this fight, by the way. I mean the floor itself, because the mob fights leading up to this boss, they are a nightmare for Yisong to beat solo. Considering the fact that they do pierce damage, plus damage, which were also fatal to, and a ton of bleed damage. So, simply put, yeah. Could not beat those guys solo, especially without having ego resources to spam ego skills. So, couldn't beat those solo. Wanted to still try the boss at least. And, you know, this boss isn't that hard to beat, but the big thing is what really makes this fight pretty much more or less impossible is the ego gift of someone's prescript. The fact that it basically locks us at 20% health is the one thing that makes this fight practically impossible. Because Sora has one specific skill when she is not in her ego state, which has a specific line that says it does not trigger defense skills. And that is really, really bad when you're stuck at low health and you're effectively relying on your evade skill as the one and only thing that keeps you alive. And it's like, that wouldn't be so bad considering the fact that she would stay in her ego state as long as we keep her at high sanity, but we're also a sinking identity, so having her stay at high sanity is basically impossible, and thus, because she's also lowering her own sanity every single time she uses a skill basically, we keep knocking her out of her ego state, and thus she keeps using that one skill where our evade is completely useless. And later on in the fight, like even right now, she has enough poise to always crit. And because we're also like a little bit weaker with our defenses because of the karmic consequences, which, yeah, aside from just deleting our health with someone's prescript, it also just straight up lowers our defenses so we take more damage. But that's just a natural state of the status effect, so it makes a recipe for absolute disaster, and one where because we don't have a whole lot of like actual damage, considering the only buff we have is a 30% damage buff because of the other ego gift, Sora just eventually kills us. Because as she goes on, she uses more of those attacks, and yeah, you'll see. The point is, if we could actually use our evade in this fight properly, it would be possible. And it's funny to think how this fight would genuinely be easier if we weren't using any ego gifts at all. Because if we weren't using ego gifts, then we would not be locked at 20% health. And if we weren't locked at 20% health, well, Gregor's support passive would be able to heal us, and thus the little bit of chip damage that we would be forced to take from the unbreakable coins of the skills that do not trigger the evade, it wouldn't matter that much. But because we're locked at 20% health, it makes it pretty much impossible. So, it's really funny to think that no ego gifts is better than beating this fight with ego gifts, but it is what it is. Honestly, I did also forget to mention that at the start of this fight, it was a pretty lucky thing that Sora did manage to stagger us. So actually missing the evade at one point was a good thing, because obviously, because the ego gift locks us at 20% health effectively, and the fact that after using Furiosa you gain the sizzling wound status effect, which basically gives Isong a single tick of burn, it makes it so that actually getting staggered is pretty likely. I mean, granted, it's pretty much not possible with the specific team that I'm using because I have Drifting Blade Ryoshu, who gives shield, and that shield basically prevents the burn from staggering Isong when he does use Furioso. But even still, you do want to get staggered early so that you can trigger the anti-stagger effect, and that makes it so that you can use Furiosa more often, so it's still good that we got staggered early. Especially because the damage doesn't matter, because the ego gift will drop us below that threshold anyways.
방금 공격은 좋았어. 이대로만 계속해보면 좋을 텐데.
But yeah, anyways, that's basically it. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.